It sounds embarrassing saying that, but I don't care. Like, I would just stand in front of the mirror and I would just dance. I remember listening to Dillinger tunes and just being like, this, I feel, this is how I feel, you know. I was there at a rave with my friends. We were 18 and I heard my tune being played for the first time in a club.
By Loxy as
By
well.
Loxy, bro. And I just remember seeing my friends, they were like meerkats. They just popped up out of the crowd looking for me and they were like, oi, oi. And I was like, oh my God. I get tingles now thinking about it.
I got tingles,
yeah,
man. Wow.
I was, oh my days. I still struggle with doing shows because sometimes I don't want to do it because I know that how much energy it takes to get up there and to really perform. It's kind of why I tend to gravitate more towards soulful stuff these days because it has a much deeper connection to me.
Time to make another deep connection. It's the One More Thing podcast. Interviews with inspiring minds and creative souls across the beats and bass sphere with myself, Dave Columbo Jenkins. This time we are gravitating towards Halogenix, a man who I've been interviewing since his earliest releases over 10 years ago. A founding member of Ivy Lab, this London talent has been flourishing as a solo artist for many, many years, sculpting bangers of all shades and hues, but perhaps best known for his barbed slant on soulful and deep drum and bass. 2023 is looking like a new level for Halogenix as he's just launched his new label Gemini Gemini and he's released some of his most meaningful and personal work in the form of his Lost Friends EP. Stick around and find out everything you need to know about Laurence Reading right now, including his rich musical upbringing and how he is forever navigating the intense pressures and challenges of being a touring underground artist in the 21st century while managing to remain well, balanced and healthy. Recorded in February 2023 in his local Tottenham stomping ground, this is another exceptional story from an extraordinary talent, most of which he's never spoken about or revealed in any interview before. Time, once again, to get inspired. Thank you so much to anyone who's listening and supports One More Thing. An extra special thanks for Halogenix for this awesome interview. Get to know. Halogenix. Hello, how are you, man?
Good, mate. I'm good. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, really nice. Thanks for joining me.
Mate, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Cool. We've got loads to talk about. I've kind of been chronicling your career almost since the very, very start, really, haven't I?
Yeah, you have.
Cool, man. We're going to go through that journey, really, and go way, way further back. But first, I just want to ask you a question about yourself, really.
Yeah.
Would you say you're an ambitious man?
I would. And it's funny you ask because recently I've been on a journey of self-discovery, which includes kind of trying to understand my ambition. I would definitely describe myself as ambitious, but I think there are kind of types of ambition that can often lead to feelings of unhappiness, I guess, you know, like never really satisfied.
Totally.
Goalposts always move with your ambitions. You know, you kind of achieve one thing and then you realize that actually there's more you want to achieve and it kind of never stops.
Yep.
And so recently I've been trying to understand, you know, the root of my ambition. You know,
wow.
where do I want to get to? You know, is there ever going to be a point in my career or my life where I end up somewhere and go, right, I made it. I can stop now. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
I don't think there ever will become that point.
No,
really.
but I want to get to a point where I feel like my ambition is more authentic.
Right.
You know, rather than trying to prove something or trying to fill a gap, you know.
Wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah, so it's an ongoing journey for me, but I definitely do have high ambitions, and it's interesting, my journey at the moment, trying to figure out what they are and how I satisfy them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because I'll tell you the reason why I particularly asked this question with you is because there's two types of ambition that I see in music. And I'll use drum and bass as an example. There's the Calibers and the Alex Perez's of the world who are just effortless. You can't sense the ambition. There's just creativity oozing out of them. And then you've got the really, really driven people like Voltage or Goldie or Andy C, where the ambition, you can sense that off them. There's an energy.
Yeah.
And I've thought about all of our interactions and everything that I know about you, and you hover between the two. Sometimes when I speak to you and we've done interviews, I've come away really inspired and I get this sense that you're on a mission somewhere. And other times it's just coming out of you. It's just flowing. It's just natural. And most people seem to fall in one or the other kind of category when I think about all of the people who really inspire me or I speak to on a regular basis. And you float between these two worlds in a way, really. Does that make sense to you, hearing that observation about yourself?
Yeah. And I think one thing, I guess, that I notice about my public interactions when I'm talking about myself or my work is that I try to bring a kind of honesty to it. Like if I'm struggling or if I'm having a good time, I'll be quite open about that. And I think that with creativity and the arts, it's so complex. It's not just about I sit down and I create art and people like it. There's your own identity wrapped up in it. There's money involved in it. There's politics involved. There's social dynamics involved. There's such a broad scope of things happening at the same time that I think it's quite difficult to gauge how someone is feeling about their work just by looking at them from the outside. And so as much as you say, and I'm not disagreeing with you, as much as you say the Calibers and the Alixes and stuff like that seem effortless, I'm sure if you did a deep dive, you'd find that they were incredibly hardworking and motivated by a strong ambition.
Oh, massively.
And then the Goldies and the Andy C's, they're probably just, they like to wear it on their sleeve a bit more. It's part of their identity. That image of being always working, always on the grind, always trying to find the new and the exciting. And I think maybe your interpretation that I go between the two is maybe an observation that I struggle with where I see myself, and sometimes I want to seem like I'm being more natural about it, and then sometimes I want to be like, no, I really want to be seen to be working hard. I say the word struggle a lot, but I think it's just something that I contend with, So I do agree with your observation, and I think that maybe that's just my character.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go back earlier on in your character. So I thought that my first interview with you was around Oblique.
Yeah.
But it wasn't actually. It was the next track that you released, which was a collaboration just a couple of months after with Sabre called Rude Industry. But it was
Stray.
See, I did exactly the same mistake when I interviewed you at the time as well. Jeez. When
Lots
you did a
S's.
Collaboration with Stray. So you did Rude Industry. It was around about that time. I mean, this was literally within a year or two of your career, really, wasn't it? Or a year or two within releasing professionally.
Yeah.
Where were you at that time? Can you even recall? Like, you must have been interviewed loads of times. Can you recall? It was on the phone and it must have just been with you and Jay. Can you recall that interview?
No.
Can you recall that time?
I definitely remember the time. It was because it was 2011?
Yeah.
2012?
Yeah, 2012, early 2012.
I was still living at my mum's house in Stokey, and my studio was in the basement. And I was 22. And so I was just keen, and I was just all my ambition was on my sleeve, Anybody that met me knew that what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a DJ. I wanted to be a producer, by any means necessary. And I was networking, and I was trying to get involved in the scene, sending music to people, trying to link up with people, and that kind of raw ambition, I think, is sometimes quite challenging in that it can be misconstrued as like being quite keen. And the word keen is like, it's not necessarily a negative connotation in that word in and of itself, but it's like drum and bass and music. Drum and bass for me anyway has kind of been seen as this very cool club. you know. And for me, I was like an outsider, and I wanted to be in it so much. It was just my dream, you know, and I didn't really consider that there was a way to do things. There was, you know, how to approach people, how to talk to people. And this very much says a lot about the scene rather than me, because I think it's fairly natural. If you want to do something, you just go for it, right? But I remember ruffling quite a lot of feathers because I was just there. I was at all the parties, being like, let's work together. Let's do this, let's do that. And people were like, chill out, mate.
Easy.
Yeah, calm down. But I mean, that tune and that time, yeah, I was just on a mission to introduce myself to the world, to prove myself to people that I wasn't just a nobody. I had something to say. And I think I just met my now wife. My mum had this house in Stokey where I grew up, and then she moved down to the countryside, and I just had the house to myself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I had the studio in the basement, and it was just party central, man. Just house parties and just random people coming through. I remember Dave Hydro lived with me for a while. Alix Eveson lived with me for a bit. And yeah, I was in that space where I just wanted to write music.
Go on.
And there was no, you know, I came into music from like Dillinger and Pendulum and the kind of much more kind of, I don't know how, energetic side.
Yeah.
But then I really fell in love with, you know, Sabre and Calibre and the much more deep introspective stuff, because it kind of spoke to who I was at the time. I was, you know, maybe trying to find out who I was and kind of alone, really, because my mum had, you know, moved to the countryside. My brother was at uni in Nottingham and I was in Hackney just by myself.
Still a kid, really.
Still a kid, like... literally still a kid. And just being like, I want to be in music and I don't know how to do it, but I'm just going to try.
Wow. And it paid off. Like,
yeah.
Your earliest release was on Invisible, Noises label, really early on.
Yeah.
So how did that come about then?
Well, obviously, myself, Stray and Sabre linked up in 2010.
2011, I reckon.
It's 2011, because Sabre wrote his album on Critical.
Yeah.
He did I think Stray did a remix for that album, and I met Stray through my friend Finn, who ended up working at Rinse, because they went to Leeds Uni. And so when my mate Finn went to uni, he asked me to give him a CD of my music so he could take it with him. And he was mates with Jay, and he gave Jay that CD, and Jay hit me up on MySpace.
Go on.
And was like, yo, my mate Finn gave me your tunes, they're really cool. And I listened to Jay's music and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And we started chatting on AIM, on AOL. And then he was sending me like demos that he'd written with Sabre. And then I was, funnily enough, in the studio with Sabre as well, because my older brother went to Nottingham Uni with Sabre's little brother.
Oh, wow.
And so
what a complex little web of connections.
Little triangle.
Yeah.
And so my brother was coming back from the holidays and with all this music on his computer, and I was like, yo, what's this? I'd never heard it before. It was all a kind of unreleased early Sabre stuff. And I was like, this is mental. Because there was a Pendulum tune called Still Grey, and it was my favourite off that Hold Your Colour album, because it was deep and it was like emotional, and a lot of that Sabre stuff was kind of very atmospheric and the kind of similar style. And so I was in the studio with Sabre was in the studio with Stray, and I was in the studio with Stray. And so the first studio session I had with Stray, we wrote Rude Industry.
Oh, wow, that came about from the very first session.
Very first session. And he came to my house, and we were in the basement in the studio, just messing around on ideas. And I think this was the first time I'd done a collab with someone I'd never met. You know, Stray just came to my house. You know, I'd never met him before, so I didn't know him. There was kind of awkward, like, are we going to get on? Okay, we identify with each other musically, but not necessarily on a personal level. And it was a struggle for like a few hours trying to figure each other out, you know.
Find each other's kind of comfort zones as well, isn't it? Because you're dealing with a sensitive, creativity is sensitive in that way. And so it's a really random, or it's quite a strange, surreal setup. Any collaboration when you haven't met anyone, isn't it?
And there's a kind of power dynamic which you have to negotiate fairly, like you say, sensitively, because there's only one computer and there's only one person that can be doing something at any one time. You know, I had a fairly modest setup back then. It was just a computer, a screen, and some speakers. Didn't have any hardware or synths or anything like that. So it was just like we were just on Logic, just, you know, pressing buttons. And so trying to figure that out was interesting. And the first few hours we were just going around in circles, like couldn't really figure out an idea, couldn't get anything interesting on the page. And then it all clicked in a matter of minutes.
Oh, go on.
It was like I think the main drum loop kind of came up. And we were like, yeah, that's cool. And then, you know, the energy changed, you know, and it was like, oh, let me have a go. We were just constantly like pushing each other to the side and getting on the computer to try and get our ideas down. And then we wrote the tune in that session. And yeah, that was Rude Industry. That was the time. And I think back about it now, it was mad. It's so long ago.
Wow, so because that came out after Oblique, but that was a long time before.
Yeah, because that came out on Drum and Bass Arena, right?
Yeah. Because I'd just started working for Drum and Bass Arena, so it was a really early interview that I'd done.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. So we're going to come back to that point, but I want to go much, much, much further back, because you were exposed to music in quite a unique way, or in a special way, as a child growing up, weren't you?
Yeah, my dad was a musician. He played the French horn in the London Symphony Orchestra, and he was like, you know, back in the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s. So he was playing with John Williams on Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, like Indiana Jones, all that stuff.
He's on those soundtracks, on those scores.
Yeah, he's on the original Star Wars. Like,
oh my God!
So he was the fourth horn. He was the fourth horn in the French horn section, and they're playing the Emperor's March.
Oh, I got goosebumps.
Right,
now, man.
It's mental. And so the stories he would tell me, and I would go with him to his rehearsals, because he played at the Barbican, he played at the Royal Festival Hall, and so I'd go with him to his rehearsals, and I just remember just the energy, and it was like I'd go there, and some of the other musicians would have their kids there or whatever, but it was rehearsals. They're all in their normal clothes. Right, they're just on the stage. The conductor's going, right, we need to do this, that, and I've got free reign of the whole building. And I'm walking around and I'm meeting everybody. I'm meeting all the techies, and I'm meeting all the kind of, you know, staff backstage, whatever. And they just loved me because I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I had basically had a AAA pass in these insane venues when I was like 10. And
amazing.
I just remember just being completely like drunk on that experience. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then seeing him then perform the actual main concert, you know, I was just so proud.
Yeah.
I was so proud, and I was so gassed to be there. And that, you know, from then on I just knew that I wanted to be in music. You know, I had to do it. It was just like, what else is there? When you're 10 and your dad is like superhero, you know?
Wow. I was going to say, was it love at first sight then? Was that your path mapped out for you there, or were there other distractions? But it sounded like it was music all the way.
When I was seven, I remember he picked me up from school once and he goes, right, you're going to have some music lessons. And I was like, okay. And he was like, so the cello or the piano? It's cello. It was a cello or the violin. And I just remember knowing that the cello is the big one that you put in between your legs. And I was like, that looks cool. And so I did cello lessons up until when I was 11, grade 5. I did the piano for about a year, and I was just immersed in music, you know. But then it wasn't only my dad either, it was my brother. My older brother was really into music. He was into all kinds of stuff. He was into pop music, he was into dance music, and I have this very vivid memory where he went out with my mum one day and came back. They'd gone shopping, and he brought back 2 CDs from HMV or whatever. One was pure techno, and one was pure drum and bass. And the pure drum and bass one was mixed by Groove Rider.
Oh, go on.
And I was just, I'd never heard it in my life. I was 10 years old. And the first track was Bacteria by Ed Rush and Optical. And I just remember that. And I was like, yo, what is this? And I would always steal. We had fights all the time when we were kids because I was always stealing his stuff. Because of course,
How much older is he?
3 years.
Oh, right, the classic age. Yeah, cool.
So like, I just looked up to him so much. Everything he did was really cool. He was always, you know, he was like, get away, you know, let me do my own thing, whatever. But I was just like, no, I just want to be part of his kind of crew. I wanted to be mates with all his mates, you know. And so I would always steal his music. I'd always go into his room, steal his CDs. And I think he really liked the techno one. And so he never really used to notice that I'd stolen the drum and bass one. So I used to have it for like long periods of time. And I would just listen to the first 4 tracks. And I would just, it sounds embarrassing saying that, but I don't care. Like, I would just stand in front of the mirror and I would just dance.
Go on.
For the first 4 tracks. I can't remember the other 3, but the first one was Bacteria, Ed Rush and Optical. There was the Diary mix of Autumn by Dillinger, and I was just like, this is mad. I'd never heard this stuff before. It was so energetic and evoked so much kind of feeling because it was so raw. And back then it would have been I was 10, so it would have been 99. And it was still, you know, from the golden era.
Yeah, still that fresh energy.
Yeah,
like, yeah,
underproduced, like kind of just mixed in relative terms really badly, just loud bass, lashing drums, and that was it.
Yeah,
and I absolutely fell in love with it.
So it was always there then.
It was always there, but it's funny because as a kid I'd never really had this sense of like wondering what else there was. Someone would show me something and I was like, cool, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah,
that's me, you know. And so I had that CD and that's all I listened to for like a good year.
Wow.
And it never even occurred to me that there was a complete world out there of this stuff, because I had that one CD, and for me that was all that existed. And then 2 things happened. My mum used to make like candles and stuff like that. She got a market stall, Spitfield's Market, and I went with her to help her sell all of her candles and that. And the dude next to us was selling vinyls, and he was this really cool guy, and I was about 10, so I was just cheeky and, you know, up for anything, and I would just you know, go and hang out with this dude and help him sell the records. And then he eventually, I think on the second day, he'd be like, I'm gonna go get some lunch, can you take care of the store?
So you were running a record store at the age of 10.
And I was like, yeah, of course, man.
Brilliant.
And so I'd be digging through his records and I'd put on these records and I'd turn it up really loud. And I remember the guy that ran the market store would always come and tell me to turn it down. And then at the end of that day, he was like, choose any record you want. Just choose one record and that's yours. And I chose Block Rockin' Beats by Chemical Brothers.
Brilliant.
And I've still got it. It's like my first ever record. But that
your first wage.
Yeah,
like, from
exactly.
music.
Got paid in records. And then the second thing that happened was I found another CD, and I found another drum and bass CD, which was an Under Fire mix CD by Mampy Swift, and it had things like Stacker and Skynet tunes on there, and Friction tunes and KT tunes, and you know, the kind of very early tech step stuff. And that was the second CD I had.
Wow.
And it was like absolutely blew my mind. So I went from like, you know, Ed Rush and Optical, Dillinger, to Conflict and Stacker and Skynet, and I was just like, yeah, I'm sold.
Wow. That's quite a refined taste for a 10 or 11-year-old as well, really, isn't it?
But there's also the other element, which was that my brother was also very into heavy metal. And so I was very into heavy metal. I used to paint my nails black. Yeah. You know, I was really into Korn and Slipknot and Lamb of God and these kind of very, what I guess would be considered now commercial heavy metal bands.
They were the business back then.
They were, man. It was so much anger and rage. And
they sang to teenage boys.
They did. And drum and bass was kind of the electronic equivalent for me of that, because it was so raw. I remember listening to Dillinger tunes and just being like, this, this is how I feel, you know, big Reese's and gnarly drums. And the the synergy between heavy metal and drum and bass for me, which is still something I think about a lot now, really kind of galvanized my affinity and love for it. There's a culture, and there's a sound which that's what's so powerful about music. You know, it transcends all of that stuff, and it kind of speaks to your core.
Yeah.
And so experiencing that at 10 years old was incredibly powerful for me.
God,
Yeah.
wow. But then there was this duality then with learning the cello and then later the piano, and probably, I would imagine, quite an academic musical influence from your father in a way.
Yes. So the cello stopped when I was 11 because I literally walked into secondary school, my first day of secondary school, and I had the cello on my back.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember thinking,
This is in a London inner city school.
Yeah.
Like you're going to get, you're going to attract some attention.
Yes,
let's say.
yes, which is exactly what happened. Oh, what's that? And I was just like, ugh. And I literally gave it up there and then.
Oh man.
I know it's you know, my dad said to me, "You're going to regret this," and I was just like, "Well, no," and then what happened is I picked up the guitar.
Yeah.
And I started a band with my mate Simon, who is Carrera from Collective.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so we went to school together. And so back in the day, we were Halogenix and Carrera.
No way.
That was
wow.
our thing, yeah. And then he went off and did his thing with Keza.
Karim, yeah.
And I did my thing. But yeah, we were in a really, really bad band.
Are there any recordings of this around anywhere?
No.
CDs
Even if there were.
stashed away.
Even if there were. But so yeah, he was a drummer. I was a guitarist, and I'd go around to his house. I'd bring my amp and my guitar. And it was just terrible. We didn't know what we were doing. He was playing like really elaborate drum loops, and I was like trying to make riffs.
Wow.
But then, you know, I would bring around my drum and bass CDs, and we were stoners, so we just got stoned and just like listened to Dillinger and just was like, yeah, this is
Brilliant.
F the guitars.
Yeah. Wow. Little did you know that you both go on then to have like independent musical lives, drum and bass lives, like in this type of way.
Yeah.
So when did production come into this? It must have been very soon after, or part
It
of
was
this.
15. So I got my first laptop when I was 15. I got a MacBook, one of the white ones, and it had GarageBand on there, which was rubbish back then. You know, it was like you could record audio on it and you could kind of do very basic production stuff. But my oldest friend Simon, not Carrera Simon, another Simon who I grew up with on my street. His friend Bertie, who funnily enough does all the artwork for me now.
Oh right, wow.
He actually makes beats as well. He's a sick hip hop producer. And so when I was about 15, me and my friend Simon, who I grew up with, he went to a different school. He went to a school in Dalston, and I went to a school in like Walthamstow. And I would go around to his house and meet all his new school friends. And one of his friends was Bertie, and he had Reason, like a really early version of Reason, and he gave me a copy of it on CD because I was like, yeah, I like making music. And so he gave me this copy of Reason, and it was like a cracked copy of Reason, and you just installed it, and that was it. It didn't come with any presets, or I didn't know what I was doing. This was before like YouTube tutorials, you know. And so I just remember opening up this program on my computer and being like, what am I looking at?
Yeah.
What is this? And just trying to navigate the menus, like clicking buttons, seeing what things did. And then eventually like a synthesizer would pop up, and I was like, okay. And then a little keyboard, and I'd play the keyboard and the notes would happen, and I was like, okay, cool. So that's how I create a melody. There was presets on the synth, cool. But then I'd try and create another one, and it would mute the first one. So I was like, I didn't understand. I was like, do people make music just with one instrument? All this stuff I'm hearing on these is like incredibly technical, crazy producers that are making stuff with one instrument. And then it didn't occur to me that it took me a while to figure out that there was a mixer. And so you had to add a mixer, and then you had to add, because Reason, I don't know if you've ever seen Reason, but Reason is like a piece of software where you can, if you press a key and everything flips around and you can see all the cables at the back. It's kind of like analogous of like an actual studio. And so you create a mixer, and then you actually plug the different instruments into the actual mixer. And so that took me ages, and I was messing around with that. And I started making hip hop. That was my first thing I ever made was hip. Even though I was really into drum and bass, I was making hip hop, and I was trying to make drum and bass at like 160, so it was like jungle speed, and it took me ages because, like I said before, with respects to not being, I guess, very intuitive, it didn't occur to me that there were things that I could go and find, resources that I could find which would teach me how to do this stuff. It was like I was very much like, I need to figure this out by myself, not through any kind of sense of like ambition, more just like I just didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And so I was just messing around, and it took me years, honestly. It took me years to figure out how to do anything proper until I was like 18, 19. I'd been trying to make stuff for like 4 years. I was making really bad jump up. I was,
That's quite indicative of the time as well, isn't it? Because like tutorials, as you said, tutorials weren't a thing. Access to information wasn't quite the same way it was. And also as a culture, even if you knew people in the scene, like secrets and techniques were guarded a little bit more than they are now, really, in that way.
There was Dogs on Acid, and that was about it for me. And so all of my samples came from Dogs on Acid. I would post clips and just get slated. Work on this, or this sounds bad, or try and do this. Are they
still there, like that famous Noisia quote of Tice asking what a Reese is or something like that? That's still on Dogs and Acid now.
Because they archived it, didn't they?
Yeah,
and then it came back. I'm sure if you looked, you could probably find some of my very, very early demos.
And then not long after that, so it took you up until 18 to you felt that you were actually managing to get the sounds that were in your head out of the speakers to a certain degree.
Yeah, it was. To the point where I was like, okay, this doesn't sound like trash.
And then, I mean, that kind of sticks with you then forever, really, doesn't it? That inner self-critic and stuff like that, really. But within a couple of years of that, you were making, everything seemed incredibly rapid from that moment onwards, really. Because then Oblique, you were 22, you were saying. So this was within a couple of years, really, still incredibly young. And everything, when it did click, it clicked big time, really, by the sounds of things.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. If I think back to that time, everything was just happening. I was just living in the moment, I didn't have any kind of preconceptions about where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. My ambition was very much just like, this is what I want to do, and I'm doing it now. It all kind of kicked off for me when I sent a tune to Sabre, who then I think shared it around with some people. I think he gave it to Loxy, gave it to Zero T, and I just remember. So I used to have a job. I used to work in television, which is another story. But I just remember thinking to myself, what would happen if I searched in Google Halogenix? And I searched, first time I ever did it, and the first hit that came up was Fabric, and Zero T had done a Fabric mix and put one of my tunes in it, and I was just like, what the what is going on? I remember sitting there, like sitting back in my chair being like, what is going on?
Wow.
Because I'd sent this tune to Sabre, and I don't think at the time, I never heard anything back, really.
Because you don't, because people are busy. Now you get it now, but at the time, like when you send something to somebody,
might get like a cheers or whatever, but
yeah,
it's like people doing their thing. And so this tune, Rockabye, was in this mix, and I was just like, oh my God. And I hit up Zero T, and I started chatting to him, and then started chatting to Loxy, because I went to Hardware, and Loxy played it, and I was just like, I was literally there with all my friends. I don't know, seriously, you don't understand how gassed I was. I was there at a rave with my friends. We were 18, and I heard my tune being played for the first time in a club
by Loxy as well.
By Loxy, bro.
And Renegade. Oh,
and I just remember seeing my friends. They were like meerkats. They just popped up out of the crowd looking for me, and they were like, "Oi, oi!" And I was like, "Oh my God!" I get tingles now thinking about it.
I got tingles.
Yeah,
man. Wow.
I was. Oh my days! I could have died there and then, and I would have been happy. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And it's funny because I saw Loxy on Friday, and I told him this story, and he was like, "Oh, really? I didn't realise I was the first person to play your tune."
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And all of that would have led then to the first signing? Was it? It was on the first track that you released was on Invisible. Was it the one that was on Horizons? Because there was 2 releases.
No, it
around
was
about
a
that time.
Scary. It was a Scary, which was actually the first. Was it the first? I think it was I think it was the second. What would then be known as Ivy Lab track, Sabre Stray and Halogenix. And Oblique was the first tune we wrote together. And then Ascari was the second tune. And Oblique obviously went to Kaz, and Ascari, because I think Gove had a relationship with Noisia because he'd worked with them on his album. And so he sent that to them. And that was, I remember going into the shop. I remember going into a shop in central London. It was a record store. And they had it. And I bought it. I bought my own record because I was like, "You got any drum and bass?" They're like, "Yeah," and they had it there, and it was like my name was on the sticker, and I was just like, "Yeah, this is another milestone in my career," and I was just so happy, you know.
Brilliant. Did you tell the people in the record shop that it was you or anything like that?
I don't think I did, you know.
Cool?
I think I'd kind of started to cotton on that there was a coolness that you had to project.
It's very hard to though when you're that gassed up and you're hitting those first kind of milestones.
Mate.
And
It's still something I struggle with.
yeah,
You know, I'm 33 now. I'm kind of long in the tooth, and I still get very, very excited. I'm becoming a bit more accepting of the fact that I do like to show my excitement.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of being a bit more kind of loose with it. Whereas before, there was definitely a time where I was like, no, I've got to keep it 100, bruv. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's a characteristic of drum and bass, and it's one that I love. But then my enthusiasm has become my currency and my signature, and I don't think I would have got as far as I have done in my career without being that really overly hypey person. And it's becoming comfortable with your own buzziness, I think, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are your memories of Oblique? Because that, for me, is a really personal tune. It reminds me of being told that I was going to be a dad. And that was the first piece of music that I heard after I'd had that news. So it reminds me of a really particular time. I remember interviewing Kazra about it at the time and stuff like that. And I just started the drum and bass arena. So that tune holds really strong memories for me. I think it's aged incredibly well.
Yeah.
What memories does that have for you?
I guess just, I'm trying to think back to the studio session. We were in Gove's house in Finsbury Park. We just linked up. It was a summer, 2011, because it came out in 2012, I think. It came out in early 2012.
Yeah.
So it was summer. Gove had this really nice house in Finsbury Park. His studio had a window. You could see the garden. Like there was trees, you know. And we were just going through samples. Gove had just written his album, and so we were going through samples, and we found the sample. I think Jay had the very start of the beat from another project, like the drums. So we dragged that over, and then we just kind of put it together, and it just kind of happened very, very naturally. And I think that's always a sign of a good song. It just it doesn't take long to make, you know. You do it in a session, maybe 2. And the vocal, Frank Carter, came from a website.
No way.
It came from a website where people would upload their music as multi-track stems, and you had access to them. It was like a subscription thing. I guess like Splice.
I was going to say like a medieval or prehistoric Splice in a way. Like,
it was kind of very much
primitive.
rooted to kind of house music.
Right.
And Jay had access to this website and had a bunch of acapellas from it, and we dragged in the Frank Carter one, and it just worked.
Pop.
There was no big kind of, you know, skies parting. We're sitting there with a pen and paper writing all this stuff. It was just drag and drop samples that worked together. It just happened to work together in the studio. And we hit up Frank and we're like, yo, we've used this thing. And he was like, send it to me. So he sent him the tune, and he was like, I've never heard this kind of style of music before, but I'm into it.
Brilliant.
And we talked to his people about getting all the rights signed up, and that was it. That was literally it. And Frank had never been exposed to drum and bass before, and then suddenly he was like, you know, because the meteoric rise of that tune, it was just like, he was just like, what the hell? I'm getting people hitting me up. I don't know, like people tagging me and stuff. Like, what the hell's going on? And that tune remained unsigned for a while. It was going to go on Subtitles, then it was going to go on Solar, and then Kaz kind of snapped it up. As far as I remember, I'm sure other people would have different versions of the story. As far as I remember, Perez played it at Fabric, and Kaz was there, and Kaz was like, yo, what's this? And Alix was like, oh, it's, you know, track from Sabre and a couple of these new kids. And then that was it. Before we knew it, I remember getting a message from Gove being like, it's being signed to Critical. I was like, oh my God.
Wow. And that marks the start of an incredibly beautiful relationship that you've had with Critical ever since, which we'll kind of get to. But I mean, you threw me a curveball earlier on. You said you had a job in television, because I was going to ask you about, I wanted to get, because I think the Ivy Lab interview is, a conversation is for another interview really,
Yep.
but I wanted to get some of your favourite moments, because then for the next 5 years, Ivy Lab took up a very large chunk
Yep.
of your life, your head, your time, everything. But first, I need to know about this job in television. Even if it's just a brief little one-liner, like, you can't just let that slip. And
So I knew that I always wanted to work in music or audio. And my first proper paid job was at a clothes shop in Highbury. And the manager, who is this girl called Katie, she was a lovely girl. And I told her that I wanted to work in music and sound. And her boyfriend was a video editor at the Disney Channel.
wow.
In Chiswick.
Yeah.
It was actually a company called Technicolor, who were the broadcast service provider for Disney, but that's boring. Disney Channel. And so she was like, do you want some work experience? I can talk to him and maybe get you some work experience. And I was like, hell yeah. And so a week later, she was like, yeah, cool. It's all sorted out. You need to go to this place. You're doing it for 3 days, and you're going to be working with the audio post-production team. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Thank you so much. She gave me time off so I could go and do it.
Go on, what a boss.
Yeah. And I spent 3 days there in the audio dubbing suites, where they would basically put sound to the TV promos for the Disney Channel. So like, when a new TV show's coming up, it was like, and next week on Disney Channel, and they'd have all these sound effects, and they were basically doing all that. And so I was in a music studio, like a proper one. And I was like, I need to be here. This is where I need to be. And so I asked them how I actually get a job here. And they said you can't actually get a job here. Like, you can't just apply to a job here. We hire all our staff through agencies. So I signed up to this like agency, and they provided temporary workers for TV and film industry. And so I had said that I had a connection there and that I wanted to work there specifically. And then so I got a job I worked in the media management department. So it was handling all the tapes, handling all the old, videotapes.
Wow.
Because everything was still on videotape back then. And so I worked there for a couple of years. And then I was doing other stuff. I got a job as a runner in Soho for TV, like post-production stuff. Worked at various different companies, worked at BT, worked at Channel 4. And then eventually a permanent role came up at Technicolor, and I applied for that and I got it. And I worked there for like a year. And what I wanted to do was become the runner for the audio department. And a runner, if people don't know what that is, it's like it's like the assistant. They make the tea, they make the coffee, they run around the building getting stuff for the actual people doing the work. But it's like you get amazing experience because you get to spend all your time in the studio. And they were like, we don't have it. It's not a job that exists. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to, it paid decent money. I was 18. And so I was like, I'm just going to stick around here because it's kind of a cool environment. I'm making money. And then I got in a bit of trouble because I was young and foolish, and I was a bit too familiar with some of the clients and kind of, said some stuff I shouldn't have done. It was very professional American, corporate world. Yeah. And I was this like 18-year-old kid, like giving it all like, fuck this, like, da, 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 da. And I got called into my manager's office, and they had this like printout of all these emails that I'd been sending someone with like very loose language, It wasn't anything inappropriate, but it was just like I was saying, this fucking and all this stuff had been forwarded onto like Disney corporate, and they were like, who is this guy?
Oh no.
And I got disciplinary because of it. And then literally it was like something out of a film. A week later, on the job postings, audio assistant. And I was like, oh my God, they've made it. And I applied for it, and they said, you can't apply for it because you're on disciplinary.
Oh, no.
And I left a month later. Yeah.
Wow.
Pissed.
Wow. At what point were you able to just pursue music, and you were at a point, I guess in when Ivy Lab were really taking off, was that a point where you could go full time then on music?
No. Because it was a while before the gigs started coming in, And as we all know, the kind of main source of money for music nowadays is gigs. And I was doing gigs here and there, but it was like, I was getting paid 100 quid, 50 quid, 100 quid to do a show. And I was very, very happy to do that. But it definitely wasn't an amount of money to kind of support myself. And so I was still working. I actually went and set up my own production company, video production company, with my mate Ricky. and we were terrible. Honestly, we were terrible. We were making really bad music videos. We made a music video for Genesis Elijah, who is now on V, I
He's
think.
on V at the moment. Yeah.
We made one of his very early music videos. We made a video for Lisa Mafia.
Right, wow.
Which is how I met my wife. She was a model on the shoot, and I was like, yo, kind of hot. And we made a couple of other videos. We had a kind of ongoing relationship with Don't Panic. And so that was kind of bringing in a bits of money, and I was still doing music on the side. And I don't think it was until 2015.
Right, wow, okay.
2014, when we kind of really, the Ivy Lab thing kind of really galvanized as a thing, and we started doing shows, and we got signed by Primary, so we were doing gigs, and the music had started to kind of earn a bit from sales and whatnot. But I was still doing bits and bobs here and there, but it was very much like just to kind of enable me to write music.
Yeah.
It wasn't like career stuff, apart from the production company, but it was, that's just because I thought, why not?
Yeah. And then what were then, so we're in the thick of IB Lab now.
Mm-hmm.
Give me just a couple of highlights. So you'll always, fond memories that you'll always hold with you about that time.
Starting the label. The first party we did at Silver Bullet in Finsbury Park. And we had no idea how it was going to go. We paid for it all ourselves. I think we had Unit, we had Flight, we had Deft come and play, and ourselves obviously. And we had no idea how it's going to be. We set up a Facebook page, and
if I remember correctly, that was a massive night as well. That was a big success, wasn't it?
It was incredible. It was roadblock for starters. We couldn't get any more people through the door, and we were playing, because this was at the time when we'd started making all the beat stuff, and we'd been getting very mixed responses from it on the dance floor. People being very passionately for it, and then very passionately against it. And so we didn't know what to expect. But there were people. It was insane. The energy was incredible. People singing along to the melodies of the tracks, and we literally all looked at each other. We were like, "What is going on?
Wow,
this is amazing." And then it kind of, so that was definitely a highlight. A lot of the touring, a lot of the overseas stuff we did, played at Low End Theory in LA, which is a legendary, absolutely legendary setup by Flying Lotus and Daddy Kev.
Yeah.
Playing that night.
I would say that's where, because at the moment America is really enjoying and really flourishing in this new relationship with drum and bass. And I think if you trace it back, the start of this new chapter for drum and bass in America goes back to Halftime. That's, and I've spoken at great length with Gove about this, that's their reference point because it links to hip hop.
Yeah.
And suddenly then it's not just this fast music that you can just kind of step back and listen on that kind of, create that space. And I think that's what started, if you trace back everything now, that's one of the big kind of things. And it was guys like you who went over and joined those dots for people, made sense of the music, really.
It's funny because that conversation is such an interesting one, because we were looking over at the States and looking at groups like Solection and people like Carmack and Saruda and all these people that were post dubstep but kind of linked to hip hop, making instrumentals, and that sound, the kind of fusion of American culture and electronic music, which we were taking as cues in how to write drum and bass, even though at half the tempo it was still drum and bass really. And so when we went over there, it just kind of made sense to them because it was something that they were familiar with. But I guess we brought a kind of edginess, UK kind of flavour to it, which people didn't expect. And so it's funny that it just goes in circles, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're influenced by them, they're influenced by us, and then it kind of creates something new. It creates all these new lanes and these new avenues and new opportunities for people. So yeah, like going over there, going over to the States and playing all those parties was definitely a highlight. And I think just meeting lots of different people. I mean, winning awards, obviously that's a good one. We won Newcomer Label, DJ Mag which was a kind of a big shot in the arm. And there was one tour we did actually. It was the Shades and Ivy Lab tour we did in 2017. It was me, Jay, Alix, and Eprom. 30 dates across the States and Canada, playing at some very small venues and playing at some much bigger venues. And obviously their thing was popping off, and it still continues to pop off. I think it was like at that very pinnacle moment of what we were doing. And so to be on the ground and witness that energy and that kind of that welcoming energy from people over there, they just loved it. They absolutely loved it. People turning up with, tattoos of like the logos and like wearing the t-shirts and singing the songs, and it was an infectious energy to be around.
Because you were still making, and this is something that blows my mind, when I was looking back over things and looking back over interviews that we had done around about the time, you were releasing on Metalheads, you had Blej and stuff like that. There was you didn't put Halogenix aside.
No.
You had this duality, which must have taken up so much of your head, just constantly pouring out. If you're not doing Ivy Lab stuff, you're doing Halogenix stuff.
Yeah.
That must have been thrilling at points, but also probably quite overwhelming and quite fatiguing at points.
Yeah,
really,
very
especially
intense.
with 30-date tours thrown into the mix as well.
Very, very intense. I feel like I always had something to prove. I had the most to prove out of the three of us.
Because you were the youngest?
I wasn't the youngest, but Jay was the youngest, not by much, but I was the kind of least accomplished of the three. Stray had been releasing stuff longer than I had bigger projects out.
He'd been on Exit and stuff like that, hadn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and he'd done some stuff with Critical before. And Gove obviously had been around for a long time. And so I was like, I was the third guy in Ivy Lab, And so I had all this energy and ambition and this desire to prove myself, not only to myself, but to everybody else, that I was worthy of being in that crew, And that was
so much of that is all created by yourself.
100%, 100%. And it's a blessing and a curse, because it's an incredibly powerful motivator, because it means that I'm just constantly on it. I'm in the studio, I'm writing beats. I'm down to tour. I'm down to get on a plane and go to the other side of the world and just do it and just be in that environment, because it was something that I really, really wanted. But then, it's very, very intense and time consuming. And 2016, I just got married. And pretty much a few months after I got married, went on tour, was going into America, was going to New Zealand, it was just very, very busy. And I was taking on a lot of that responsibility because I wanted to. And I look back at it and I think that it was maybe an inauthentic, like we said earlier, it was an inauthentic ambition, because it was an ambition born of like...
it came from the wrong place.
Yeah, it came from this idea that I wasn't good enough to be there. And so I had to do more than I guess was necessary in order to prove my value.
Even though you're like collaborating with Goldie and doing tunes with Cleveland Watkins.
I know, it's insane. It's insane. And I anybody I tell this to, they're just like, and it's an ongoing discussion I have with myself in context of, speaking to my friends, family, whether it's in therapy or whatever. And so, that the environment that creates is one of intense stress and inauthentic kind of gain, I guess you could say. Because the gains I was making were rooted in, like you said, the kind of wrong idea about myself and about who I was, and so I wasn't happy.
Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered what you would have achieved. It wouldn't have been enough, because it wasn't. You were looking at the wrong goal in a way. Yeah,
I was wearing the rose-colored glasses. It was all the success was through the lens of but you're not good enough to be here. And so it got to 2017, and I was just non-stop on the road. And I remember it. I remember the day I left. I messaged those guys and I was like, I can't do this anymore, because I'd just finished a 2-week tour with Gove in the States. And, working with, being in a relationship with 3 people, myself and 2 other people, when the stakes are incredibly high, because we're making lots of money, we're relying on each other to constantly make music and to constantly be at at the forefront and the cutting edge. That's the responsibility that we were given by. It almost seems like we were given that by the industry. It was like Ivy Lab, cutting edge.
Yeah.
At the front of it, even though objectively we weren't.
But you were pushing the boundaries,
Yeah.
and they continue to do that now.
Yeah.
Their album last year was incredible, and I think that's where Ivy Lab was happiest, really, in that type of where it exists, like in the spectrum of things. But yeah, that's so much pressure. I mean, I was in a unique position because you'd asked me to report you leaving the band on UKF, and DJ Mag on the same day had randomly asked me to go to their studio, which isn't far from where we are now, actually, to interview them about things. So I was speaking to you and I was speaking to them all within the space of about 24, 48 hours.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed by how grown up it all was. There was just a place of complete respect and love for each other when I spoke to them about it. And I said, look, we're going to do the announcement on UKF. They were fully aware, and they're like, great, we're really glad, all power to him. We want to see this. And then when we published that story, they shared it, you shared it. There was this, it was handled in an incredibly, if we think about drum and bass and beefs and people falling out and bands splitting up, it was the most grown-up, mature band split I've ever known or been able to witness so close up firsthand.
I guess that was intentional, because all of that, what you say, all of that kind of negativity ultimately just ends up hurting people. It serves no purpose. Yeah. It creates drama, it creates gossip. It detracts from what we want to do, which is write music, right? And in all honesty, it was messy. It wasn't all rosy and kind of and nice. It was, I was jumping off of a moving train.
Well, yeah.
And leaving, a relationship which I had cultivated and been a very core part of for 5 years, and 5 very formative years of my life, And for the other 2 guys as well, it was by far the biggest project that we'd been involved in.
Yeah.
And
you kind of went into Ivy Lab as a child and came out of it as a man.
Yeah. And I felt that the stress and the why I was putting so much energy into it was not going to end up for me as a happy story for me.
Yeah. You
said earlier about ambition, and I have this idea of ambition to me about like where I want to get to where I want to get to in my career with regards to ambition. And there's an Australian tennis player called Ashley Barty who won the US Open a couple of years ago. And she was 24 when she won the US Open, right? And she used to be a cricketer. She used to be an Australian cricketer.
Wow.
And then she gave up her cricket career and was just like, I guess I'm just going to play tennis. And played tennis, won the US Open, and then quit.
Yeah, go on.
And then retired. She was like, I've done it.
Yeah.
I don't need to prove myself. I'm done. I've clocked tennis. Yeah. I'm going to go do something else. I don't know what she's doing now. But I remember, because I was, through pandemic, she won the US Open in the pandemic. And I just remember I was just big into tennis then. And I hearing her story, and I was just like, I rate that so much. Yeah. And that kind of really speaks to a deeper reason about why I left Ivy Lab, because I just felt like I would have constantly been putting all this pressure on my shoulders to do more, to be better, to work harder. And the impact that was having, even though I wasn't necessarily consciously aware of it at the time, it was having a very bad impact on my life. I had got married in 2016. I had spent hardly any time with my wife until 2018 when I decided to leave. And I did this tour. I did this 2-week tour with Gove, which was very intense, and then flew home, put my laundry in the washing machine, took it out of the tumble dryer or whatever, packed it up and got on a plane to South Africa and played a festival when I landed. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much for me. This constant like movement. This having to put all this energy into being on stage, and it's these were big crowds. These were big stages, and I kind of looked at myself and I was like, surely this is the summation of my ambition. This is where I want to be, and I was deeply unhappy. And I think the only option was for me to hang it up.
Yeah.
Because I would have just, my health would have suffered, and my relationship would have suffered, and
Has that changed your relationship with touring ever since?
Yes, big time.
Where are you at with touring now? To the future, to the present day for a second.
I want to do shows that I enjoy, and that I know that I'm going to enjoy. And I think I've had enough experience in the game now to be able to foresee what I'm going to enjoy and what I'm not going to enjoy. At the same time, I understand that in order to maintain my career, I have to play shows. I have to go out there and perform to my fans. It's part of what I do. But there's a much greater understanding of my limitations and my desire to go out and do those things and to spend time away from home. I'm a father now. I've got an 18-month-old son. I have a wife. I have a family. And I feel like I don't have the luxury now to just be away all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's unfair on my wife to just have that, just to be like, well, I'm a touring DJ. You know what you know what you signed up for. See you later. Like that's a choice that I have to make. And I know it impacts my career, and I'm fine with that. And so I'm
it makes it special then though, doesn't it?
It
when
does.
You do play...
It does because I'm really choosing to be there. And honestly I still struggle with it. Honestly. I still struggle with having with doing shows because sometimes I don't want to do it because I know that how much energy it takes to get up there and to really perform. Because after the Ivy Lab thing, I was so burnt out. And I was just like trying to find my way. What am I doing now? What is Halogenix?
Yeah.
What is Halogenix if it's not an extension of Ivy Lab? Because that's what it was.
Was that why Laudel came about at that time, the Laudel project?
Yeah.
Almost like a kind of a debriefing, a decommissioning or recalibration of yourself and ideas that you'd had and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I'd separated my physicalness from the Ivy Lab project, but I still do completely identify with the philosophy behind the music. And the identity of the music is still a big part of myself, which is in that sound.
Mm.
And so to then suddenly stop writing that was just strange, and it felt disingenuous for me to not put that music out. But at the same time, I was aware that there was it may have confused things slightly by releasing that stuff as Halogenix, even though I did.
Yeah.
With Deep News.
Yeah, it was that had everything on it. That was a real statement piece and almost like an album, really, in a way.
But I felt that was it was ill-conceived, because not ill-conceived. It just wasn't very thought out. It was very much like, I've left Ivy Lab. I still write beats. I write drum and bass too. Here's a project with it all on. And it didn't really do what I wanted it to do.
What did you want it to do then? Because I listened back to it and I thought it works really well. Like, it's almost now, looking back at it over in hindsight, it's almost like an album. And I think it stands the test of time more than I remembered it doing, really.
It's funny because you sent me over a very brief outline of what we were going to talk about, right? And when I got to this part of the conversation, I really sat back in my chair and I thought about it, because I figured you'd ask about it. And my answer would be, I didn't think it kind of did what I wanted it to do. And then you'd ask, what did you want it to do? And my response to that, which I thought about, was that, which was a difficult one for me to kind of admit to in my head, was that I think there's been a very real sense of kind of cognitive dissonance with regards to why I left Ivy Lab. On one hand, the stress and the anxiety and the impact it had on me was real, and it was honestly the best decision I've ever made in my life with regards to my career and my well-being. But at the same time, I can't just switch off that part of my brain that was like, yeah, but you need to prove, you now need to prove yourself even more.
Out of the frying pan and into the fire in that
Literally.
type of way mentally. You're
Literally.
like, wow.
Like, it was something I had to do, leaving, but at the same time, it didn't cure my insatiable appetite for kind of this feeling of self-worth. And so the Lauderdale project was born out of that. Deep News was out of that. And, you know, I don't think I'm ever going to get to a point in my musical career where I go, everything I do is great and I'm happy with myself as a performer.
Wow. We have come full circle in that type of way, really, haven't they? But surely you're closer to being comfortable with that inability to be happy, or no, inability to accept that's the peak, if you know what I mean. As the longer in the tooth you get, that becomes an easier process, I think, doesn't it?
I think my viewpoint changes and the ambition kind of evolves. The ambition then becomes about being satisfied and being happy. And so if you kind of, there's an exercise which I do, which is I imagine my life and what it would be like if I was happy and content with what I'd done, and then I work backwards and kind of think about, okay, what would I have had to do in order to achieve that? And one of the things is just to put out music that I like, and to actually,
as simple as that,
literally, and to trust that what I'm writing, and when I experience moments of joy and satisfaction, that's genuine.
Yeah.
And to be like, okay, I'll be writing a tune. It's kind of why I tend to gravitate more towards soulful stuff these days, because it has a much deeper connection to me than the other stuff. I feel I feel there's a lot more of my identity in that music, and so I'm much more able to be like, I like this, and so I'm going to put it out, or I'm going to add it to a project.
I think Lost Friends really sums that up, really, doesn't it? That must have been, I mean, it's a deeply, deeply personal, that, you know, that track alone, really, and the artwork and everything. I mean, just take a moment to just big up Ebo, really, there, isn't it?
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, you know, that news kind of still does. Hits me like a ton of bricks. And, you know, because we shared a studio together in, just around the corner from here in Tottenham, and we became very close. He was a very introspective soul. You know, we had lots of conversations about ourselves and about our identities and who we were, and he was a father and he was a musician, and he was having similar struggles to me. You know, who was he in the context of Foreign Beggars? Who was he in the context of an artist, a father? And even though I wasn't a father at the time, I felt this very I felt a great affinity towards him, because he was so open about his struggles, you know. And when he passed away, it was terrible, and I took it very badly. I was very sad. Very sad. And we'd had a bit of a disagreement about 6 months before he passed, and I didn't speak to him for a while. But luckily, we had reconnected about a month before he passed away, and we had this conversation on the phone where we just like reconnected, and we both kind of just said, you know what, that is what it is. We're both sorry. We love each other. Let's just kind of move on. And the last time I spoke to him was when we were playing Call of Duty on PlayStation. And then about a week later, I heard the news, and it was very tough. And then I felt like, you know, I'd written that track was written after he died, and it kind of encapsulated the feeling I had of sadness and a bit of regret that we had not spoken for a while, and then a bit of, you know, joy about the relationship that we did have, and that's what I mean, that, you know, that's the kind of stuff that I want to put my name on. That's the stuff that I feel passionate about.
Yeah.
The other stuff, even though I do like it, the Blej's and the, you know, the Shellers and all that kind of stuff, because that speaks to a kind of inner angry child, which I still have. It's a lot less powerful and pungent. That
Yeah.
feeling of like, it's nice and it's cool, but
That's the seed from which everything grows from, but
Yeah.
the flowers that grow above the ground are very different, aren't
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the journey.
yeah.
Tell me about the rest of the EP, because there's Alix plays a really strong role in it, and
Yeah.
Alix has played a really strong role in your career. He's come up quite a few times
He does.
already.
He has.
I think this is your 14th collaboration with him. That's
14th,
mad.
mental. I mean, Alix was a kind of constant in my musical career, my musical journey, from even before I started making music, because when I was DJing, collecting records, I was always buying his tunes. I was buying his early stuff, Horizons, the very early Shogun stuff.
Yeah.
And I went to go and see him a few times. I went to go and see him at Fabric, and I went to go and see him at Play at the End at Shogun Night. And so to then fast forward to then suddenly be working with him, but working with him very closely, was a dream come true, honestly. And although now I guess we could be considered equals. Obviously he's a lot further down the line than I am and more accomplished, but we exist in this kind of similar space.
Oh man, yeah, contemporaries. Yeah.
Ultimately, I'm such a massive fan of his, which makes it amazing for me to work with him. And we've developed a very close relationship. And the thing is with me, right, is that I'm an honest person. Like, if I'm not feeling right, then I'll say something, and that can be quite challenging. And so, like with a lot of people who are close with me, and it's usually the people that are close with me that bear the brunt, is that I can be quite vocal about if I'm not happy with the relationship. This is what happened with Ebo, and it's happened with Alix. We've had periods where we haven't spoken to each other.
Oh, I think creative when you're creating with somebody, and again, it's that same as that very delicate balance of collaborating, really, isn't it?
You're sharing a lot of your personal thoughts and feelings through music.
You open yourselves up vulnerably. And you make yourself vulnerable as an artist anyway, don't you? Full stop.
Yeah,
right?
Which is challenging when relationships go from a working relationship to a personal relationship. And I've worked with Alix. Obviously met Alix professionally, obviously saw him DJing and that, but then started working with him in the context of Ivy Lab. Because he'd had a long working relationship with Gove, and so it was just natural that we were going to work together, because he was also doing the beat stuff as well, and then obviously went to work with EPROM as Shades, and the majority of the work we did, even as Ivy Lab, was just me and him. That was the beauty of the Ivy Lab project, is that it was a collective more than a singular artist. It was a singular artist that had 3 members in it. And so it's funny, kind of going back to what you said before, as Halogenix. Halogenix became an offshoot for stuff that wasn't appropriate for the Ivy Lab project, like Blej. A lot of the stuff that I had lying around after I left was just stuff that I'd written that wasn't going to form part of the Ivy Lab project, which then went on to be on Deep News or whatever. But yeah, working with Alix. He's an inspiring guy. He creates music very effortlessly, and it's nice to be around that energy, And so we've found ourselves in the studio time and time again. From the orchestra EP, I think that was about 3 of those were just me and him. The Shades thing was us 3. Obviously the stuff we've written together, and it's a relationship I hope to continue, because I think we feed off each other musically. I'm definitely inspired by the stuff he does. I know, even though he may not admit it, I'm sure he's inspired by the stuff that I do. And so it was only right for him to be featured on this project, because we actually wrote that track. We wrote 2 tracks in that session, Arme and Perfect Stranger, which he ended up taking on his little kind of mini LP Without End, which was in 2020. And then we were trying to, the idea of this label has been around for ages, since I left Ivy Lab.
Yeah.
Because we had a label, and I was fully aware of the freedom that having a label gave in terms of being able to just put out your own stuff whenever you wanted and
About
package
your own
it how
stuff, with your artwork and your own pace and everything.
Set your own schedule,
creative control,
have your own agenda with it.
And what is the Gemini agenda, and what about the concept of the label itself as well?
I mean, above and beyond just putting out my own music, which of course it is, it's a kind of, I want it to be a place that is a home for quality, and class. And I think, without wanting to speak of myself too highly, I guess I hold dear the fact that my music is quite classy. It's quite elegant. The music, it's not cheesy, it's not too commercial, poppy, whatever. It's like, it kind of bridges it's kind of, it exists in that world. And so I just want it to be a place for that music. And also, what I'm doing with the label is that I'm doing the splits, even though it's just my music for now, the splits are going to be more heavily weighted towards the artist.
Love that.
So the artist gets more of the money. And so I want to just change the dynamic that exists out there.
Yep.
And whether it's just me that does it, I don't care. But I feel like I want people to be rewarded more. Because the whole 50-50 thing, I'm like, I understand it. It's the status quo. It's how the music industry has been always set up. But really, nowadays, in the current kind of climate, a label, okay, yeah, I'm providing my experience, my clout, I guess you could say, for lack of a better expression. And so I'm creating a platform for people to do that. But is that really worth 50%? I don't know. Also, it's a choice. Like, I just want people to feel like they're rewarded better, and they take more ownership.
This is something that's really this is hugely interesting to me, because I'm also establishing one more thing as a label as well. And I was really inspired by Rebel Music when Ben, who runs that label, said that the artists get paid 60 and the label take 40. So effectively the artists own more of the label than he does. And I love that. And that's what I'm doing with my label.
Exactly the same as Gemini, 60-40.
And I'm speaking to a lot of artists. So many people get treated really badly from labels. And I think the longer I've been in the industry, the more I'm trusted with, and people are told that they're owed hundreds and hundreds of pounds for press and promotion or mastering, and they're asking me advice on this. It's like, I didn't even know labels treated people that badly, to be honest. I thought that there was a lot more professional respect than there actually is. But there's a culture, it's not exclusive to drum and bass in any way, but I think the more underground sounds, the less overheads the less profit margins there are, so the more likely it is for labels to be penny pinching and not treat artists properly. But there is a real culture of people not being treated fairly in this creative industry, isn't there?
Yeah, it's the over commercialization of art, and the capitalism of it all. Because it is a huge money spinner. There's so much money generated from music, from gigs, from sales, from streaming, from rights, from syncs, all that stuff. And so if you're a label, and if you're a bit nefarious as a character, and you set up a label and suddenly you've got thousands of pounds coming into your account, I understand the mentality that some people have, where they're like, yeah, but I'm going to keep this. I think it's a stupid mentality, but I understand it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a symptom of a completely warped and broken system. And I think it takes people just making very small changes to create a behavioural change within a community of people. So you get new labels who offer weighted splits towards artists. Then that just becomes the new norm. Yeah. And then artists feel like, oh, actually, I can actually support myself from doing this, rather than giving away 50% of my masters to a label and then also never getting a statement.
Yeah. Recounting seems to be a huge thing, or feeling that they have to be on the road constantly all of the time, eventually getting themselves into the situation that you were in.
Yeah. So it's very important for me that when I was setting up the label, it's like the why, and not going too deep into it, but because I could have just continued to put my stuff out on Critical, and that would have been a completely fine avenue for me to do so. But
I was going to say, and that's an example of a label who have done things, who've stayed above board and treat their artists with respect, because you can see by just how long people stay on the label for.
Yeah,
that's evident that Kazra does his business right in that type of way, and has developed a community.
Yeah, and he's the poster boy of how to run a good label. He cares about the artist. He talks to you in depth about what you want to achieve. He's upfront with all the money. He pays you on time. There's freedom there to do creatively what you want, and the incredible platform to promote your music and to do amazing shows. Yeah. He sold out Printworks. I mean, that's mental.
Yeah.
Underground label selling out Printworks. Mad. So
I've always said to him, ever since our first interview that I did with him around about the Oblique time, was that it's interesting because he came into running a label through the love and the craft and the creativity of running a label. Yeah. He wasn't an artist. He didn't have an ulterior motive. He didn't have a sound or anything like that. He came from, I think before that he was doing like punk bands and stuff like that, and came from a real kind of garage kind of background and stuff. And so he
just loved the music and wanted to promote it.
Yeah. And I think that makes a difference then, because there's no ulterior motive there. He wants to create this amazing kind of platform there, and I've always found that inspiring.
Yeah.
And another label, I think that I certainly, a family that we're both orbit around as little satellites is Vision as well, which, has kind of been you've been part of that life in many ways, or that world, that community as well, really, which again kind of seem to value the relationships that they have with people and empower you, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the main strengths of that is just their reach, and that they have access to all of these people and all of this talent that it takes a lot to run a label. Like, it's not a massively expensive endeavor, but it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes, you have to be very creative about how you do things. And so for them to take people who are unknown, relatively speaking, unknown people, and co-sign them and be like, we're Noisia and we believe in this person, we're going to put their music out, is such a shot in the arm. And it's such a powerful thing to kind of give away your clout like that. Not that it's a zero-sum game, not that just because they're giving it away it's not theirs, but you see a lot of times people gatekeep their position, and they don't want to share.
Yeah, because they're worried about losing a bit.
They're worried about losing it.
Yeah.
Whereas no one's ever going to touch Noisia, ever. So they can do that, and the fact that they know that, and that they're willing to do that, is amazing.
Yeah. And I've experienced that myself as a broadcaster, as a radio host, you know, in the same way that artists have when they're signed in that type of way. But I think when we look back over your career, you have got you really value relationships, I think, and connections, don't you?
Yeah. I don't really have time for relationships that mean nothing. And I was just trying to think of how to say that without it sounding like I'm a dick, but like, if I work with someone, I want there to be a reason that we're working together, not just because I like your music you make, and therefore I think we make good music and we can sell it and become big DJs. Like, I don't care about that. Like, I care about you as a person, and I want to identify with you as a person. So therefore, we feel like we can be open and create something that means something. So like working with Tice, right? That relationship came because I'd sent him a bunch of Ivy Lab beats, and this is when they were just starting the Vision Radio, and he was really supportive of that, and he invited me to the studio, and I was like, this is Tice. But before we wrote any music, we brought him over for a 2020 party when we were doing it at Phonox, and I'd kind of charged myself with being his chaperone.
Yeah.
Like, he made his way into town, but then I met him for dinner, went to the club, and I'd seen him before and I'd spoke to him a couple of times, but then, took him to his hotel, met him in the morning, went and got lunch, stuck him on a train, and we just talked about stuff, and he's a very deep thinker.
Oh, massively, man.
Right?
Yeah.
And, we became friends, and so we worked together as Noisia and Ivy Lab, and then later down the line as Laudel and Tice. And there was just there was a solid foundation there of a friendship before there was music. The same with Alix. The same with
it's really interesting.
with Kaz. It's like, obviously the music is the music is the starter, but then the relationship is what kind of carries it.
Yeah. And I think with some of these instances, certainly with Tyson, with Alix, it captures your conversion from that fanboy, that original Laurence who was dancing in front of the mirror, that original, pure, passionate man who loves this drum and bass, to a fellow craftsman with these people who's a peer of theirs. And these relationships kind of, they transform over that time, as you do as an artist and stuff like that. So they capture both you as a private music-loving individual and you as an artist who puts out their soul into the world. Really.
Yeah, and it's quite a thing to comprehend, really, that transformation, because it takes a lot of, and like we were talking about earlier, my whole thing about doubting and not believing in myself or whatever, being in that space is very confrontational. It's like, oh my God, do I belong here? Yeah. Really? I'm in the studio with Noisia. I'm like sitting down with Nick, watching him mess around in Serum, and he's teaching me stuff. And like Tice is like teaching me how to use the modular. And like Alix is like, teaching me how to do this and showing me all this stuff. And Kaz is like talking to me about writing EPs, and Goldie's phoning me up going, I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and da 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 da. And I'm going, what is going on? And there's a kind of like, there is almost a disassociation which I have to contend with, which is like, there's part of me that refuses to believe that it's happening at the time. I'm like, there's no way. But then, as my friend would say, you have irrefutable evidence in the world that these things have happened and that you belong here. So just accept it.
Yeah.
But then there's still part of my head I was going, but
it's almost like you've
blagged it. You've blagged it. You've blagged your way in there.
But I mean, I'm exactly 10 years older than you again, and I still get that now.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever changes. But what is changing now is that you're creating a platform, and eventually we'll have something in place at Gemini Gemini where you will be able to pass on, and I'm sure you do with other collaborations and people that you inspire with the new generation coming through, those, kind of 18 to 20s, like exactly where you were when you were first breaking through.
Yeah.
That's still really, really close to you. That's still at the forefront of your mind. That still feels like yesterday at certain points. Probably feels like millions of years ago as well in other points.
Yeah.
Like time does that type of thing. But it seems like Gemini Gemini is going to be your opportunity then to give other people the chance to have that experience and to sit there going like, fucking hell, I'm with Halogenix. Oh my God, I can't believe it. And go through that same twisted, complex knots of the inner turmoil that goes through your brain as a creative person.
Ultimately, yes. I think that's where I hope that it gets to, is a place where people feel that they can, people feel that they can send me music, and if it's a right fit, then it kind of works out for everybody. I guess immediately, it's just another evolution in my story and another chapter for me to say, okay, this is something I'm doing. It's funny because someone asked me this question before, when the initial promo was done for the EP. There was an article, I think it was Mixmag, and it was like, what's the ethos behind the label. And that was it. I did an Instagram post, and someone asked me, "What's the ethos behind the label?" And I was like, I don't know if I sat down and was like, I have this overwhelming feeling that there's something missing in the world, and that Gemini Gemini is going to be the thing that fills that gap. I don't think that necessarily means that it can't be that, and it can't be this, I'm not saying it's going to be grandiose like that, but it's like, it can't be a platform for people to come and feel like they have a home, and their music is listened to, whatever. But it's just something that I wanted to do, and in the space of trying to be truer to myself and accept my thoughts and feelings more, it's just something that I wanted to do and did.
Yeah. You don't need that ethos, but you did have the why, though, when you thought about it to begin with. I think that's the ethos almost comes over time, really, then when you realise, doesn't it? Yeah. How far ahead into the future are you looking? Are you planning? It seems that you're taking it very, very easily, and nothing is going to get thrown out. Nothing is going to get rushed in any type of way. It's completely unhurried and very natural.
Yes, and also I want to create a kind of momentum with it. I think I'd typically I'd been releasing 1 or 2 projects a year. I released Dragon Force EP was 2020, and then I didn't release. There was no major project after that. There was a few singles, but there was no big kind of EP or anything like that. There was a couple of remixes. And I think that now the current climate of music is one where you just have to be visible all the time if you want to maintain a kind of if you want to grow, if you want to consistently grow. And so from 2020, all this stuff was written years ago. The Lost Friends EP was written years ago, and I've just been sitting on my hands waiting for the right moment to feel like I was happy enough to release it, but now I'm like fully scheduled up until July. So my goal is to release one thing a month. So I've got January was Lost Friends, February Arme, March the EP with the other 2 tracks comes out, then April is A Thing with Strategy, which is a kind of Laudel project, 140 thing, Pray for the Dead.
Brilliant.
And then May is a thing with Liam Bailey, like a vocal thing.
Awesome.
And then it's kind of like there's other stuff. There's a thing with JD Reed, which is amazing. He's one of my favorite producers.
Go on.
Thing with D-Bridge, and just other stuff. It's all kind of in a folder, and I just need to make sense of it.
And see what the time is right, like you say, kind of reacting to things then and having that flexibility. There's an analogy that London Electricity gave me when he left Hospital Records, and he was saying he really liked the time of it being a speedboat where you could just suddenly go pyong, 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 and it had become an oil tanker, and that's why he wanted to leave. And I thought that was a really good analogy, and it's how I feel about a lot of stuff I'm doing with One More Thing as well. It's like just responding to energies and just having an idea, someone calls you up and thinking, that would be a really good collaboration. Yeah. And there's only certain points, I think, in your career where you can truly just embrace that energy and have the freedom and the flexibility, and that's where you're at now.
I definitely agree with that. And it kind of goes back to the whole Critical thing. There was never, it wasn't like I don't want to be part of Critical anymore. I still am part of Critical, and I still will put music out on Critical.
You'll always have a place at that table, won't you?
Yeah. And but also, I want to be in a position where I can just be like, I've got a tune, I want to put it out next month, let's go.
Yeah, there comes a time when I think you need to as an artist, really, in that type of way. Yeah, that's brilliant. What else does the world need to know about Halogenix then? We've traversed your career. I continue to chronicle it from pretty much the start,
from
really.
Day one.
Yeah. What will I be chronicling next? So what do people need to know? What haven't I chronicled? Never used the word chronicle so many times in one sentence.
Nothing really. I think it's a fairly open book. What you see is what you get. My ambitions, I say that word with a bit of hesitancy, but my ambitions for the future are definitely just to continue to write music that I like, that I agree with, that I connect with, and eventually, give that platform to other people. Because honestly, and I've always been a passionate advocate for this, I feel that there is such a powerful thing in giving away what you know to other people.
Yes.
To the next generation.
Yes.
And allowing them to come through, leaving the ladder down, whatever metaphor you want to say. And I am honestly thinking about, the next 10 years. What do I want to do? Do I want to do this forever? I don't know. Like Ashley Barty.
Yeah.
Do I want to get to a place where I feel happy and go, see you later?
Go on.
Nice one.
So we're going to see you win the US Open then in a couple of years' time.
This is what I mean. I don't know what that looks like for me, and it's a scary but exciting question to ask.
Yeah.
Like what do I want for this? Because I don't think I want. I say this now, I could change my mind, but I don't think I want to do this forever. I want to get to a point where I can happily say, I've done it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy with my achievements. I don't think I'll ever stop writing music just because I love it so much. But maybe I'll stop DJing. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Really, really exciting. I wish you all the best with everything, and thanks for taking the time out and trusting me with your story, really,
Mate,
and telling me all of this, man.
Thank
It's
you so
brilliant.
much for giving me the time and the platform to be able to talk.
Awesome. My pleasure. We'll do another one in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
Cool. Halogenix. Thank you.
Big up.
Brilliant.